Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Love on Campus acknowledges that we meet on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage and beliefs and relationship with this land. We acknowledge that these lands are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today, and we extend that respect to other Aboriginal language groups and other First Nations people.
Welcome back to Love on Campus. I'm Georgia Nichols and I'm here today with Dr. Amy Matthews.
Hi.
And Kathleen Stanley calling in from at home with baby August.
Hello.
And today is Book Club.
Yay. Best week
Woo-hoo.
of the month.
So today,
last book club of the season.
That's insane
so
that
true.
2023 is wrapping up.
Last
That's
episode of the
just
season.
nuts.
Absolutely insane.
Oh.
Well,
What a year. What a year.
Well, you've had quite a year.
yeah, you've had quite a year.
You had a big year.
I think we've all had quite a year, but yeah.
So today we are talking about our Christmas read, Mistletoe and Mr. Right by Sarah Morgenthaler.
Do you want me to read the blurb?
Yeah, I was going to say, should we start with the blurb read?
Yep. So
Good idea.
The tagline is How the Moose Almost Stole Christmas. Lana Montgomery is everything a quirky small town of Moose Springs, Alaska can't stand. A rich socialite with dreams of changing things for the better. But Lana's determined to prove that she belongs, even if it means trading her stilettos for snow boots and tracking one of the town's hairiest Christmas mysteries, the Santa Moose, an antlered Grinch hell-bent on destroying every bit of holiday cheer and tinsel it can sink its teeth into. And really, how hard could that be? The last few years have been tough on Rick Harding, and things aren't getting any easier now that his dream girl is back in town. When Lana accidentally tranquilizes him instead of the Santa Moose, it's clear she needs help fast, and this could be his chance to finally catch her eye. It's an all-out Christmas war, but if they can nab that darn moose before it destroys the town, Rick and Lana might finally find a place where they belong together.
Hearing that back,
Yeah.
the moose, I feel like it's not actually that big a part of the book as it is on the blurb.
It's in there. No, it's true. It's true. My kid, I was reading it because I was describing the Santa Moose, and as I was going, I'd get further and further into the book, and my kid was like, have you seen the moose yet? Has she got the moose yet? And I'd be like, no. And then the moose catching, spoiler alert, doesn't happen till like the final page.
It's a bit plot device,
Doesn't she
isn't it?
let
the
it
moose?
be at the end?
No, she just asked him to put his Santa suit back on, and they're going for it. They haven't actually caught it at the end.
So I don't even know where to begin. I forget how we go about book club.
Well, I think we're lucky we've got Kathleen here for this one because Kathleen's
know.
research is Christmas romance.
Yes,
so
exactly.
I
Yeah.
feel like we just need to ask a question and we're going to be off and running.
Well, the thing that I wanted to talk about was
Go for it.
Lana and her character.
Yeah, I think she's really interesting because actually Kathleen brought Lana up. I'm trying to remember. It was one of the episodes we did earlier, like months ago, where we were talking about
Billionaire
romances. And you said,
Yeah.
oh, we have this book coming up. And I was thinking about it as I read it. I was like, oh, yeah, because Kathleen said this might be a different way of imagining the billionaire romance.
And I will say the way it was just described on the back as a socialite, not as a businesswoman, pisses
I
me
know,
off
that is really annoying.
instantly.
Because it's actually, because I read
I'm like,
that
why
first.
is she a socialite and not a successful businesswoman? Because she's a really successful businesswoman in the book. And like, what?
She's not actually a socialite at all.
No, not at all.
No.
And I think what's interesting about her character, and it kind of plays into the Nepo baby conversation that's been a bit
Oh, yeah, it is.
popular as of late.
Topical for 2023.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting that she like comes from this family and she talks about how they're not very like family oriented and things like
They
that.
do seem quite family
Yeah,
oriented, though.
that's a whole
Just
other
in a different way.
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms. But what I think is interesting is that she constantly sort of distances herself from her money and her privilege in that sense, which she's like, oh, it's not my money, it's my family's money. Like, I just work for the business. I just do all of that sort of stuff, which I didn't particularly enjoy because it's like denying a privilege a little bit. I don't know.
I wonder if that's why she's doing it, because she's trying to not be judged by that privilege, not in a way that just sounds. I think she knows that it's a privilege, and knows that's not the way to reach the people. Like, she's not trying to use her influence and her money in that way to reach them. She's trying to show she's more than that.
I do know that, but I think that there's something maybe I think about this about in general with like sort of Nepo baby conversations and conversations of privilege, that it's easier to acknowledge it than it is to sort of shove it aside. And I feel like that's sort of done a bit with her character when it comes to her money and things like that. And like, she's the one who's going to inherit the business and things like that.
Let's just maybe...
Can you give an example, like, to like maybe break that down a little bit more?
Before we do that, can I just quickly, for the listeners, because I don't know that they're following us, I'll just outline what exactly Lana is and how it's happening. Because we went from social.
I immediately jumped into it.
So basically, there's this town of Moose Springs, and Lana's family owns this kind of multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that has businesses all over the world, and she has a portfolio of like 250 million businesses or something huge, like some huge number of businesses that she's personally responsible for. And she absolutely loves this little town in Alaska where her family would go when she was small, and they own the resort but also a lot of the businesses in town, including the hero's property. They own the land, the building he rents. And
I think the resort is one of the only things they don't own, actually.
She's just staying there.
Yeah.
Yep.
They own the town but not the actual resort.
That's right. That's another family. That's Jax's family. But the town hates her and her family. Like, half the town do. Half the town want tourists and want to bring people in so they can survive financially, and the other half of the town hate tourists, hate the Montgomerys for wanting to develop the town, and so part of her mission is to win the town over because they absolutely hate her. So that's the context for this discussion that Georgia and Kathleen are having.
And I will say she's also the only female other than her mother on the board, which is all her family, and it's all like her dad and all her male cousins.
Yeah. So it's a really family-owned
and they're
business.
all they're all vying to be the next one to take over. Like, it's assumed it will be her, but all these male cousins are sort of potentially going to push her out.
I thought that was a good reveal because I didn't realise she didn't have any siblings or anything until the board meeting. There's a board meeting reveal where then at the end you realise she finally pulls rank, and you're like, oh, she's going to be the boss, because I hadn't realised until that point. Anyway, so that's the context of this conversation.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's complicated, that's all. This one was more complicated in terms of her setup.
Yeah, I think that, like, if I just think about situations of privilege, I would rather them acknowledge it in a different sense, as opposed to, like, sort of, she constantly is sort of like, it's just the business owner owns it, the business this, like, it's not mine, it's my family's, blah, blah, blah. I think I would rather be like, I would rather some sort of acknowledgement of like, yeah, I know that I come from this very privileged position and ultimately might inherit it all one day and it will be mine and I will be a mega billionaire, but that's not what's important to me and in this moment, in this, town, I think.
That's interesting. So this gets back to, because I'd love to bring you in on this, Kathleen. About that contrast between male billionaires and Lana.
Yeah.
Too.
I did want to talk about the girl boss.
Yeah, well, that's where I was hoping we'd go with this conversation, because there's a moment near the end where I think it's her mother, Jessica, says to the hero right at the end, they're at a fancy party in Chicago, and her mother says, there are men in here who would marry her in a heartbeat if she agreed to it. She's rich and she's powerful and she's beautiful, and one day she'll own more than anyone else in this room ever will. And so I think you see that a lot with male billionaires, where they're gorgeous and they're powerful and they're going to inherit like all this stuff. And like Kathleen said, this is one of the few times we have a female billionaire. So I'd love to open that up to you, Kathleen, for your thoughts, because I know Georgia is itching to talk about the girl boss, but we might want to talk Lana through a little bit more and then move on to girl bossing.
Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting statement to make too, when you think about the fact that she's not really allowed to just be that confident in it. And even Georgia's comments where she's like, I think acknowledging privilege, I don't know if we have those conversations about the male counterparts in the same way And I do think Lana, especially by the end, she definitely is very about wanting to give it all back and make sure that it's not her overpowering and her being that. And she seems so insecure and like she needs to negotiate that all the time. And I do think that's where gender comes in, where we're looking at the rules that we don't, not that we don't accept, but the rules that and pressures and vulnerabilities that gives and creates for a woman that it doesn't for a man. It's not a hang-up for a man, that power.
I would also say in this book, she's the cinnamon roll hero. I think she's because his response to her mother is really interesting. This is where I think we can really unpick gender a little bit too, because Kathleen's right. That is not a criticism made of the. In fact, the male billionaires, they're usually alpha hero romances, right? So
like we said last episode, the Christian Greys and the
yeah. But when we have a female billionaire, this is Rick's response when Jessica says, "Yeah, she's rich and she's powerful and she's gorgeous," and he says, "You asked me why I'm in love with her. It's because she tries to catch moose so people keep their Christmas lights. She finds kittens' homes and helps grumpy kids when they make mistakes. She makes completely accurate gingerbread towns for people who don't even like her and dives into freezing cold water after strangers." So that gendering is happening on the page.
Exactly. And so this is the thing that sort of catches me up. It's this, and I would compare Lana quite a lot to Nora in Book Lovers.
Oh, that's interesting.
In that I think Nora is maybe a better representation of that career-oriented.
Would you say better or one that appealed to you more? Better. You're going to go with better? Okay, double down.
Of representation of sort of a career-oriented woman. I think it's interesting. The thing with the girl boss, I'm gonna talk about the girl boss. I'm gonna define it and I'm gonna give you some
I know
stuff
this is
that
one
I
of
read.
your jams, so go.
I love talking about the girl boss. So I read a couple articles about it. The one that I preferred the most was one from Vox. One that I think really sort of had a bit of a white woman perspective was from The Cut. But that was interesting. So it's this idea that the girl boss sort of arose around early 2010s. And it's this idea of the wealthy college-educated white woman who's in executive business positions. And the girl boss is sort of synonymous with hustle culture, with a feminism like twist, the optimistic, almost religious desire to get ahead and work in life. That's from The Girl Boss is Dead, Long Live the Girl Boss. And it's sort of branded as this empowering, but often more so fake woke idea. So I would sort of give like maybe the Margaret Thatcher example. Like it's Margaret Thatcher in a position of power and she's made it to that point in time, but she's a bit of a class traitor and like all this, gets towards
I was
fascism.
thinking when you're talking more of like Sheryl Sandberg or but then I mean there aren't that many examples of women who have inherited multi-billion dollars and been this kind of like a Lana figure.
Yeah. No, the inheritance thing is different, I suppose.
And that's probably where the socialite slur comes from, don't you think, Kathleen, is that the inheritance of because that's what Lana's feeling the pressure of in the book.
Yeah. I've got some
definitely
quotes which are interesting. It's infantilizing while also pushing a near impossible template of success that predicated on her femaleness, a female leader could on her own solve the problems inherent to capitalism or startup culture.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, okay. Yeah. Can you read that again and let's think about that in terms of this book? Because hold on, before you read it again, I want to set up the book. And Kathleen, correct me because I know you know this book very well because you're using part of it. Yeah, I think you're talking about it in your thesis.
In my PhD. Yeah, this is one of my PhD books, yeah.
Yeah. So correct me because I know you'll know it better than me. But at the end, what Lana's trying to do, because she loves this town, is try and find a way for it to be sustainable, right, to exist, because mining has gone and so there's a scene where she gets Ash to fly her in the helicopter to the top of the mountain to look down at it to try and see it from a new perspective, to try and find solutions. So she is a figure who is coming in with her money and power and trying to, out of love, save this place. And I think that links to this quote, which you could probably unpack.
That predicated on her femaleness, a female leader could, on her own, which I thought was interesting, I think that has that individualist capitalist idea to it, solve the problems inherent to capitalism or startup culture. which is also sort of related to this idea of a power fantasy and a utopian promise that sort of also exists.
Interesting. So what are you, when you're talking about girl boss, are you trying to, is this a critique of post-feminism?
Yeah, I think it's also this idea that simply placing a woman in a position of power, like in like the billionaire role, if you will, in this like career-oriented, successful career person place, that somehow in itself solves these sort of structural problems that exist in the
So you're saying, like, if you're using Margaret Thatcher, she's still a patriarch.
She's still a patriarch. She's still like this like conservative upper class woman who doesn't like working class people and milk snatcher Thatcher. I don't know.
So we're talking about Thatcher here.
So,
yeah.
So,
we're not talking about Lana here. We're talking about Thatcher here.
But like this,
So is this quote meant to be saying that that's the pressure women feel as a girl boss, or is that the interpretation? Like, I'm trying to place.
Well, I think that quote in itself was talking about the pressure of these positions that girl bosses exist from. That's from the Cut article that I thought had quite a white woman's perspective on it, that sort of placed the author, I think, placed herself in a place where sort of a victim mentality in and of itself. But I think it's like there's this idea where simply because it's this idea of like white women co-opting empowerment and feminism for profit with no mention of sort of lifting anyone else up. I don't think that this is necessarily happening in this book specifically, but I think it's interesting to talk about the girl boss in and of itself, because this is like a utopic.
And what exactly about it? I'm just, because you keep saying the white woman.
Yeah.
I'm like really interested in why or where you think race intersects with this.
Well,
like, I'm sure it does. I'm just sort of curious, because that, I think that when we're talking about power and people in positions of power, that could be maybe a universal problem. But I'm interested in how that might intersect.
Well, I think there's an inherent privilege in itself being a white person. Like, even if you do manage to
absolutely
achieve certain levels of success, the sort of blockades and things like that keep you from it are going to be different based on race. The girl boss in itself is based on, it's specifically based around the founder of Nasty Gal. So that's sort of important to know. It's this woman who where Taylor Swift does it a bit, where you sort of have this heavy emphasis on sort of empowerment and feminism and all that sort of stuff. This idea that
so you're really talking post-feminism.
Yeah, it's this idea that you've placed a woman in the role and therefore that's empowering in and of itself. It's this emphasis on empowerment as opposed to liberation. It's this, and I think that white women forget a lot of the time that there's these intersections of oppression ultimately change the way you experience like certain aspects of sexism and all that sort of stuff. And that happens a lot. As I said in the last episode, I'm reading Women, Race and Class by Angela Davis, and it's this idea that, you know, I don't even know how to explain it. Girl bosses is such a difficult
Well, I think you're really
concept.
Talking post-feminism. We're only just starting to get into post-feminism in our theory reading group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think this is very much located in that era.
Yeah.
As opposed to, it's not this.
It's not in the fourth wave.
Lana's a certain kind of figure, I think.
Yeah, and I think, so Kathleen, you mentioned the fact that there's two women on the board and it's her and her mother.
Yeah.
And I think that there's this like assumption that simply because there are women in those positions that that's somehow sort of moving towards justice and liberation. And so there's also an Angela Davis quote where she talks about how diversity is not a synonym for justice. So while these women might be in these positions of power, are they really considering, you know, working class people and people of different class backgrounds to them? Are they really considering people of different races and how that intersects and everything like that? That doesn't necessarily, simply placing a woman in that role doesn't necessarily.
I wonder, just to hijack this back to Christmas, how this intersects with this being a Christmas fantasy.
Yeah.
Because I think one thing the Christmas fantasy is doing is that level of comfort that Kathleen talked about a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
that like I don't know how overtly political. I mean, Kathleen can talk to this more than me. Political you would be in a Christmas romance because it's seeking to do a kind of comforting.
Oh, absolutely.
Narrative.
I think that Lana I think that there's probably this harmless sort of creation of her character as this empowered woman of itself in a powerful role and all those sorts of things.
I think her use of power.
I think we need to look at it as a two-pronged thing here. We are going to read it as academics, and I think when you write a Christmas romance, the intention, as Amy was saying, is less political. But as George is saying, when you read it, especially certain types of people, you can't. And I think that's where, to me, it's interesting that you brought up race and the white woman and aspects of that, because it's like we're all white, so we read it and maybe can escape into it in a way that people of different cultures perhaps wouldn't get the same comfort that we might from it. The intention is there, and the author is also white. So, okay, like there's definitely those aspects. But I would say that there is the potential of, and I'm not sure how much of the girl boss intersects here directly with this, but you bringing it up makes me think and go, okay, how does the fantasy work if your privilege, maybe as a white woman, and access to Christmas and all those things that it entails is not the same, and how that might affect a reading of it. Because I think you're both like hitting off on a two-prong. Like Amy's right, it is just designed to be comforting. It's not really designed to be political, but anything that's written down on paper can be engaged with in a political manner.
Well, I think everything's inherently political.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that.
Yeah,
I think it's got this coziness to it. That
Yeah.
then when you glance off, like you're doing the girl boss, there's this disjuncture that's not always there in other forms of literature. I agree. I have two things I find interesting when you that I thought of when you were talking about one, whiteness, and two, around her kind of adoption of the figure of paternalistic figure of wealth. One is I found it interesting when you mentioned whiteness. There's no mention of the First Nations people of Alaska, even though it is still very much a frontier state. And there are many different peoples in Alaska, I believe. So that was interesting, and particularly being a Christmas ideology, like we started talking about the complexities of that when we first kicked off the month. But then the other one, I just highlighted some things because I thought this was funny, because the thing with Lana is she does feel the pressure of the role, and she is also she adopts I'm going to say maternalistic rather than paternalistic, but she does adopt this caretaker role, right, with the town, with everyone she meets, with Red's nephew, like solving that problem. She's constantly trying to solve everyone's problems. But then I thought also she's quite violent in her thinking. I don't know if anyone noticed this, but like, you know, there's a bit with there's like a creep at the hotel who's like a sex pest to one of the workers. And she said there's a bit where she talks about wanting to crush someone's nose to a pulp. And then one of the workers, like the manager at the hotel, is talking about the sex pest. It says, I want to take a tire iron to Bayard's crotch for getting handsy with one of my employees. There's all these moments where women in positions of power have these incredible violent kind of, they never do it, but they're thinking in these very violent terms about, I guess, striking back at the bad side of patriarchy.
Yeah.
But there's an adoption, like you're talking about, when you're talking about the girl boss, you're talking about women adopting the already existing patriarchal roles.
Yeah.
And as we've talked about before, we can only exist in the templates that we're given.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so power has been presented, like post-feminism was such a neoliberal framework for like the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world or whoever. Hillary Clinton is another really good post-feminist example.
Hillary
like
Clinton
you are presented with these templates of power, and in order to step into them,
you just adopt.
These are, you know, some of the things. And Lana is, you know, complicates that because she does love all the, she does like try and find a home for a kitten, and she does love cookie decorating, and she's a mixed figure, I think.
Yeah, I think that's
very gendered.
She's an example of the she's an example of the complexity of wanting to be in the cage and hating the cage at the same time. That I think when you read sometimes about masculinity and patriarchy, they talk about how men are just trapped by it as women, in the sense that they feel so disempowered by their power because they have to engage with it in a certain way in order to be an acceptable form of man. And it's sort of like she has to be this particular type of boss and power-hungry, performative, millionaire, everything. But she doesn't really want to be that. She wants to be successful. She's not embarrassed by success and how good she is at her job. She's not apologetic for it. But she does resent the elements of it that put her in a patriarchal cage, I think.
She's a very interesting figure, I think, because I think what you can see is multiple templates going on at once. Like if we were talking last week about, female masculinities, she's kind of got masculinities and femininities, but they're very extreme ends of both. Like
exactly.
Like her power is mediated by an extreme hyperfemininity as well.
Yeah. And like the high heels, the makeup, not the makeup, I suppose.
Definitely. I also like what you said. I like what you said, Amy, about talking about the violence and how they think it but don't enact it. And it reminds me of a scene where Rick, her cousins come into his bar and they insult the crap out of him and they insult Lana, and he wants to step in and say something, but he knows he probably get access to his thoughts. He says, I know, like he sort of says to himself, I know Lana can handle it and she won't like it if I step in, and it's not the right move. Like there's this negotiation of his own masculinity in that moment where he has this instinct that he knows he has to temper down because it's not the right play. It's not the right kind of masculinity. It's not going to be what she wants, and it's also not the kind of behaviour he knows he should be engaging with. But there's an instinct there. There's this instinct he has, but he tempers it down. And it's sort of interesting you said like how that also is happening with the females in power, almost like he's not the one in power in that moment but still feels that urge.
Yeah. That's a good segue to him actually, because he's a fascinating character.
I was going to segue into the sort of the dynamic that exists then as a couple when you have this powerful female character and then this man who's
he's a regular guy.
He's a regular guy, and he's in sort of a lower economic position to her.
And he's failing pool.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that while economically, and maybe, economically they have these different positions that they exist in, but when it comes to these sort of social roles that they take on, once again, it sort of leans into those patriarchal ideas. It's him as the protector. I think I was talking about, like, what did I write down? He isn't the breadwinner, but he is big and strong. He works with his hands, which are always described as calloused. He's like he has these masculine ideals about him. And Lana, though she exists in that sort of powerful economic role, has these markers of femininity about her. And I think that that's then interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And she also, she lives in his home now and, all that sort of stuff towards the end. Or maybe
she
not.
travels a lot.
Yeah, travels a lot, but comes back to... And so I think that's...
you're right, because she doesn't really have a home, but he's a bit of a homemaker, isn't he?
Yeah.
Because he's got the home and he looks after Diego, and he's got the hedgehog and the cat.
It's presented in that really
so
really grumpy way of he never intended any of this, but somehow he's adopted everything.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, that dynamic then, that the gender roles maybe still exist a little, but then they're still challenged in others.
So I don't know if it's even gender roles or if it's physicalities versus gender roles.
Go on.
Yeah, explain.
Well, you explained how he looks as masculine, he's rough and he's got this big body and those markers. But he also is staying at home. He's got more that homestay kind of vibe. he's looking after. He's sort of got the single dad thing sort of going on, which is usually assigned more to the mum.
Looking after
And
is an interesting
she's got the like millionaire thing, which is that we've talked about is not typically presented in female, but she's hyper feminine in the fact that she looks girly and she wears makeup and she's got the high heels and
all those
just such an interesting negotiation is.
Yeah, the descriptions that Amy read out about why he loves her, and it's like this list of like inherently feminine, like these things that you would maybe associate. And I think like you saying like this looking after idea is also super interesting because a lot of the time the patriarch is seen as the one who takes care.
He's like the wife figure though, because there's all these lines in the book. There's a lot of lines about the town needs a strong protector, and that's Lana, right? And Lana is, it's like she has to care for the wider community, and then she needs him to care for her so she can do that. Yeah. And that's like the wife, the wife behind the great figure. He adopts the traditional wife role.
And does switching that role just in itself, does that really do something, or are we just swapping them out?
It does something. Like it's not nothing. It's a step in the...
Yeah.
I was going to say, it's definitely playing it out at the very least in a way that I think we need to play these things out to see what they look like so we can know where they work and where they don't. So we can poke the holes and go, this is... And I think also to break down the idea that only one person can do it, which is still something that is unfortunately in society.
I think also we're probably...
too prevalent.
We're probably bouncing off that conversation about the tensions for women. Do you know, like I mentioned Hillary Clinton, but you could name any of them. The minute you put a woman in a position of power, she's at risk of being seen as too hard, too ambitious.
Yeah.
So all these feminine markers are softening her appearance, right? Like it's okay she bakes cookies. It's okay she's also a homemaker. It's okay she doesn't wear pants. Or because I think AOC in the US is a good example of like an unmarried, attractive woman who cops a lot of flack
for not softening herself in that sense.
Yeah, like, and I think there are others, and particularly once you bring in different presentations of femininity, where the conversations, and I think we as women know this, right? Anyone who saw the Barbie movie, which does it in a flawed way but a really interesting way, enters into that realm of like there is no easy way to engage in this conversation because it's all a mess. It's a hot mess.
Yeah. And I do think it's interesting because Lana is meant to be, we see her vulnerabilities and we see her softness from the beginning. Whereas with a millionaire male, it's
always hard.
Not until, I'm like, I think both heroes are always meant to come to a place where we see their vulnerabilities and emotional and soft, gooey center and find that there is one. But I think, there's a pressure for her to have it still there from the very beginning in a sense that we wouldn't put that pressure on a male millionaire. We would allow him to just be that strong, powerful, unapologetic, heartless guy until the heroine softens him and brings that out and shows it, where we didn't need Rick to do that for her. Yeah, but we sort of instead see that he appreciates that about her, but it already existed in her.
There's a line, which I'm probably not going to be able to find in time to read it out, but there's a line where she talks about his sexiness was a combination of, I think it's manners with an appreciation of her capabilities. Like, it was really nice. Can I, before we run out of time, there's a few things I really don't want us to miss, even though I'm not hosting today.
No, go on.
One is like the date at the B&B with all the little...
what are on the wall?
Are they chipmunks?
Oh, my God.
What? Can we please talk about that?
That was the creepiest, most hilarious thing I've ever read.
Yeah, what? Does someone want to explain it for the listeners? Well, you should read the book just for this chapter.
So they go on their first date and he just keeps driving because he's like, I don't know where to take her. And they end up at this random B&B and they walk into the restaurant and on the walls are all these taxidermied, what animal is it?
Squirrel. I swear it's squirrel.
Right? And they're all dressed up in Christmas outfits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they have to have dinner there.
And then they get snowed in. They get snowed in and they can't, like, they get 2 rooms, but one they can't stay in because it's like more squirrels. And then they go into the other room and there's like one squirrel and all dressed up, and it just keeps reappearing when they try and put it in a drawer, so they get freaked out and have to sleep in the car.
Perfect opportunity for a shared bed trope, and they don't do it.
There's no real sexy sex.
No.
It's not really specific.
No.
But fun for them to share.
It becomes a shared car instead of
Yeah,
shared
it
bed.
is. She falls asleep on him. But I thought that was amazing. And then I wanted to ask why we've got Kathleen about the depictions of Christmas, because the one thing that tripped me up, apart from the Santa Moose we can talk about in a minute, but when he comes, like a big gesture, because she loves Christmas and she never really had a settled home family Christmas. And when he arrives with decorations for her room, but he brought a fake tree. I know you're both advocates for the fake tree, but honestly, they're in fucking Alaska, people. They're surrounded by trees. And why a fake tree?
Maybe because it's a hotel and he wasn't sure if they'd be allowed a real tree.
Ugh, low effort, man.
It's the smell. It's the smell of the tree.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sweet. The setting, I will say, very Christmassy.
Yeah.
From the outset. Yeah. Immediately. And that's great.
Yeah. And not over, I don't think overly cheesy, because sometimes you read the ones and they're really cheesy with it, which is fine. I think Christmas is, you're allowed to have a bit of cheese, but I don't think it went too cheesy. It was cutesy more than cheesy.
Yeah. I as the Grinch of the group,
you were into that.
Yeah.
I liked the opening town meeting was held in the barn filled with all the Christmas decorations.
Yeah.
And when she tries to sneak in, a giant elf falls over, and that was cute. Or reindeer.
Those devilish elves, that every time someone opened the wrong door would cascade everywhere.
Very Gilmore Girls.
It was very, actually, yes, it did have that vibe. If anyone's a Gilmore Girls fan.
Yeah.
Which I am probably one of the biggest Gilmore Girls fans in the world. Hence why this book is this was definitely my recommendation, because anything Gilmore Girls is going to
what team are you on Gilmore Girls?
I am Team Logan.
Okay, you're going to have to, I'm so sorry, I've never watched it, so you have to explain to me the different teams.
There's three boyfriends for Rory, the young one. So there are three boyfriends. There's Dean, who sucks. Jess. I'm Team Jess.
Well, I actually would
I didn't even need to ask you, Georgia. I knew you would be Team Jess. I didn't even need to ask.
I could probably guess. I would say, just from knowing the two of you, I can't imagine you'd ever go for the same man.
Yeah, that's
You've got
true.
very different tastes.
Logan is interesting, though. Like, Logan's he's I don't mind him, but
I think Georgia would be surprised I'm Team Logan. She probably thought I would be Team Dean, but I'm not. I'm Team Logan.
Logan makes sense, though. I've seen the Logan argument, and it makes sense for Rory. I get it.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Jess is almost too good for Rory.
I've only ever seen clips of it, and I'm guessing Lorelai ends up with the cafe dude. Yeah, that's in clips.
Oh, God.
Yeah, if I'm being perfectly honest, I'm Team Lorelai and Luke. But I think that all of them have their problems. All of Rory's boyfriends have their problems. I just ultimately think at the end of the day, the right one for her is Logan.
Yes,
but Moose Springs, definitely, because it even has the cafe, like the busing cafe, and then it has the resort hotel, right?
Yeah, yes, it does. Oh, it's so Gilmore Girls coded.
Yeah, I haven't even seen Gilmore Girls, and I kind of can pick it.
And the town hall meeting.
The cafe, can I just say the cafe with the best cinnamon buns, which I was like, so appropriate.
So let's talk about that moose now. We haven't got to the moose.
Yeah, the moose.
The moose was a very plot device kind of thing. I think the moose became a convenient reason to move the story along.
I didn't think it needed it, personally. I thought that you could have cut the moose and it would have been the same.
Yeah, I do agree, because there was more of a drive there just to this idea of like her trying to get the town to accept her.
And do you know we were talking a while ago about meetings a couple of weeks ago? Last week? Whenever we talked about it? 2 weeks ago. Yeah. December is a blur.
Yeah. God knows.
So I was thinking about George's comment about you don't like them meeting off page or any of that, because that I thought was underworked. I would have liked to see more about their...
I agree. Their like beginnings. It was sort of... Obviously, they meet in the book that's before this because it's a part of a series.
Yeah.
And they have that moment. But
is that one the tourist attraction, or is that one Enjoy the View?
Tourist trap?
The tourist attraction is the first, and Enjoy the View, which I actually think Enjoy the View might be my favourite of the three.
Oh,
is the third one.
Who's the hero in that one?
What's his name? The twin, the guy.
The twin, the one who's a climber.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to say Easton.
I want to call him Emmett for some reason.
Easton.
Yeah.
It's Ash and Easton.
Easton.
Yeah, Easton.
So,
Easton.
I do think that their meeting was just sort of ultimately a little bit underwhelming in this book. I think they could have, I don't know, I think they
I
could have
wanted
been
more, because there's a sense he's liked her ever since they were kids.
Yeah.
But I wanted more of that. I could have used even a flashback or two.
I agree. I think that
I think the groundwork is done in the book before, like Georgia is saying, which is I think that sometimes the downside to these series ones is because they kind of want you to oh, look, there's trails of other couples I want to follow, but you're probably not going to get their meeting. Like, I feel like, Amy, if you ever wrote the book that I want you to write from someone else's bucket list about Hemsworth bartender, we've already had their meeting in someone else's bucket list, so you would have to do a lot more work to probably bring that meeting in the second book, because we'd already have it.
You don't actually see the first time
they meet.
It's just a matter of structuring the book, I suppose. But yeah.
So have you got more thoughts? Because you've done a lot of thinking about this book, Kathleen, and I feel like we've talked a lot. Is there anything?
Oh no, it's really nice to have other people talk about it and give me other things to think about in regards to it, rather than just all of my own stuff. Because I think when it's your field, you forget that the stuff you know isn't just basic and for granted, and you're like, it's nice to be able to talk about it and be reminded.
It certainly sparked quite a big conversation, big point of contention for me, but I enjoyed talking about it.
Can I ask a question about her family? Because there's a lot, for me, that it got a little bit repetitive. I know why it's there, and I get what Sarah Morgenthaler was doing, but it gets quite repetitive. It's like for the first half of the book, almost every chapter she's talking about her situation, right?
Yeah, and how it's not very good. But I thought it wasn't that bad.
Well, there's a lot about her family and isolation and feeling like the tension of her role and not ever having a proper home or but then when they go to Chicago to her family home with her parents, they all seem quite lovely.
I think this is an author thing more than there's so much potential in this story.
Yeah.
If you're not afraid, it's what we talk about all the time, or at least I talk about it all the time. You've got to not be afraid to really go there with your characters. And I know that's something that you teach, Amy, and I haven't come to your classes, Georgia, but I assume that you're of the same thing when it comes to this character development, and you need to take them all the way down. You need to really dig in, and I think sometimes authors don't do that work. They kind of, and I think it's tempting with a Christmas romance to keep it fluffy. But there's really no reason, and in fact, it's such a good opportunity because you really are able to go into the family stuff, and you can reach a lot more people with these books.
Yeah,
if you're not afraid to go, I'm going to go heavy, I'm going to go deep, I'm going to really engage with why people have problems with families at Christmas.
Even if you love your parents, there's that old poem, they fuck you up, your mum and dad. Even if you have a really happy family, you have some baggage.
Yeah, they should have gone full Succession.
Well, the thing is,
full
she's kind of riffing on that, right?
Yeah.
With the cousins, and yet there's a moment, spoiler alert, everyone, where good Killian almost dies, and Rick, and that's why they're in Chicago, is Rick goes with Lana, and she's at her cousin's bedside, and it's supposed to be a really emotionally tense moment, and it's just but until now you've kind of been talking about, how competitive it is and how isolated you are, and I felt that weakened those moments at the end with her parents and her cousin, because actually what you were seeing play out was a very close family.
Yeah.
And so there was I think you're right, Kathleen. I think that she could have dug in more and unpacked that, because it also labouring on it so much in the first half. I would have rather see it than be told it.
I think that's a thing a lot of writers fall up on. I think you kind of fall on your own sword when you do that. Don't be afraid to do flashbacks. Don't be afraid to take us back. It's like what you guys are talking about with the meeting. Take us back if we're not there. Give us that flashback. Give us a different view of it, a different perspective, a moment. You can sometimes just be a little moment. I think if we just seen a few moments where Lana was showing how she maybe just felt the pressure of her isolation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because sometimes for people at Christmas, just being single is hard enough.
Yeah.
You know, like being that one single person when you've got all these other beautiful family people who are this, that, and the other. Yeah. It can be enough to make Christmas unbearable, even if your family are wonderful.
Yeah, that's
right. And so, you know, you dig into that. What does that mean? What's that coming back to? Let's dive in and talk about the pressures and the feelings there, and how even people who say I'm happy being single feel sad at Christmas because they ultimately feel they're missing something, which where does that come from? What does that mean? What does that do? Like, there's so much there that you can really dig apart.
I also think, there were a few moments for me where she just backed off from the conflict when she should have gone harder. Like, you know, when she's first thinking about dating Rick and her mum is like, just do it. And it's just like, well, there's a moment for tension. And like when her mother talks to Rick.
Mum could have been a bit judgy.
Well, or there could have been like one of her cousins is the one like stirring up trouble over it. But there's really not much conflict with them being together. Like, only that she would have to travel. He's fine with it.
Yeah.
Like, but maybe that's trying to keep it a light and fluffy thing. But I thought she could have doubled down on one or two tension points.
I think she tried to a little bit when Rick comes, and the mum's actually not a bitch to Lana, but she's a bitch to Rick, in that she's trying to run Rick off behind Lana's back. And I feel like that's where it reveals that there is a problem there, that Lana's mum actually does want her with someone who's not Rick. She just doesn't tell Lana that. But it's not developed. You have to read between far too many lines to really make that connection. Yeah. And that's being generous.
Yep.
Well, sorry. We're getting to we're at the end point, really, of our podcast this week.
Of our season!
I know, of our season.
I
know. So we're going to end almost what feels like mid-conversation.
Yeah, which is so apt.
You know, that's just what we've got to do. But I suppose what I've got to do is I have to say thank you to everyone for listening this season. We're so grateful to have anyone tune in. It's it's the best. We've really loved recording, talking, getting all our general thoughts just out there and published.
Yeah, and before we sign off, I want to give you a heads up about what's coming when we come back in the new year, so that you can get reading, because we'd love you to keep up. When we come back, we're thinking we'll be back maybe February. We need to work out some baby-related things.
Yeah.
Maternity leave
we may start recording in February, so you may hit us on the airwaves around March. I think in
March, maybe.
Yeah.
So what we have is we'll be coming back to talk about the Pamela Regis rule, the attraction. And then we'll be looking at the subgenre of small-town romance, which we've started touching on a little bit today. Yeah. And then we're going to
Gilmore Girls fans come on.
Represent. And then we're going to be talking in week 3 of that month about the bet or the deal or some kind of dare, like those challenges where you are challenged to date someone or hook up with someone. And the book, our first book for 2024 is going to be Bet on It by Jodie Slaughter, which we haven't read yet, so we're very keen on that one.
No, I haven't read it yet either. This will be our summer read.
And then we're thinking, because it will be quite a long hiatus, we're going to release little footnotes. So these seasons are the chapters, and then we're going to have some footnotes coming out over the summer. So we'll start through December with some little Christmas recs for you. They won't be very long episodes, maybe 10 to 15 minutes, but we'll try and recommend some Christmas books, some Christmas movies, and hopefully you won't miss us too much if you're getting a little dose of us every week.
Yeah, keep the romance alive.
Yeah,
that's right.
Keeping the romance alive. Thank you so much, everyone. Love on Campus, signing off for season 1.
Happy holidays and happy new year for 2024.
Yes.
Yes, happy holidays, everyone, especially to my beautiful co-host.
And back at you and baby August and Dean. Congratulations on a wonderful end to the year.
Thank you.
We will see you all, talk to you all next year.
Bye.
Bye.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.